Hi, this is June Blender from SAPIEN Technologies, and today I'm going to introduce you to a very simple multi-window or multi-form PowerShell GUI app. Let me show you how it works. It starts with a main form, often called a parent form, and it opens a child window or child form. When I type, I'm going to scoot this over. When I type in this form, I'll say hello from child form and click OK. The text that I type appears in this read-only window on the main form. This isn't a very useful application, but it does show you how to deal with multiple windows, how to open the child window from the parent window, and how to get data from the child window and display it in the parent window. Let's begin. I'm working in PowerShell Studio 2016 today, and I'll click File, New Form Project, then Multi-Form Project. And we'll call this Get Text from Child Form and click Create. To see the project, click the Project pane, and I like to pin it so that it's easily available. PowerShell Studio has created two form files, .psf PowerShell form files, one for the child form and one for the parent form. It's also created a globals.ps1 file, a script that in more complex projects we'd use to create global variables. We don't need to use that today, so I'm going to close it. I won't delete it, I'm just closing it. It's still available to me. There's also a startup.pss file that ties all the project files together. And again, in this simple project, I don't need it, don't want to delete it, but I can close it. So now I'm starting with a main form that already has a Call Child Form button and a child form pane. So let's see how this works just by default. On the Home tab, I'll click Run, and up comes the main form, and when I click Call Child Form, the child form opens right on top. And while I can click the buttons on the child form, if I try to click anything on the main form, it seems to be disabled. That's because I've created a modal window, a very common window structure in Windows. Main form calls the child form. It's the parent of the child form. And as long as the child form is open, there's focus on the child form and its features. When you close the child form, either by clicking a close or cancel or OK button, control returns to the main form. And now I can again use the button on the main form. Let's begin with the appearance of the child form. I'll come over here to the Properties pane, and I like mine in my properties listed in alphabetical order. And I'm going to start with a form border style and changed it from sizable to fixed. I like fixed single. Any fixed value will work, and that saves me from having to anchor the elements of my form. Also, I don't need the cancel button, so I'm going to delete that and move the OK button over to its position. Next, I want to add a label, so I'll start at the toolbox, grab a label, place it on the form, and then click the label, make sure it's in focus in the Properties pane, and change the text property of the label from label 1 to send a message to main form. Great. Now I'll grab a text box, place it on the child form, and I want to enlarge it, so I'll change its multi-line property from false to true. Now I can resize the text box. It looks about right. and squish up the form. And the last thing I want to do is make it very easy to read the text that I type in that text box, so I'm going to enlarge the font. I'll change the font property from the default, which is quite small, and I like SAGO UI. I'll make it SAGO UI 12. Click OK. Now the last thing we'll do is to rename this poor text box, which still has the default name. To make our scripting a little easier, let's make this text box send message. We'll click OK. If there were more script, it would list all of the references to that variable in the script and ask if we want to change them all. We don't have very much script, but we'll still click apply. So the only script that we really need for the child form is to make sure that the OK button is disabled unless there's valid text in the text box. Let's do that. So the child form script begins with an empty event handler for the load event. And in the load event, we want to disable the OK button because there's nothing typed in the text box. So that's button OK. Dot enabled, it's enabled property, and set that to false. Now if someone types in the text box, we want to re-enable the button. To add the text changed event, I'll go back to the designer and double click the text box because text changed is its default event. And now we'll set button OK dot enabled to false, and if the text box dot text dot trim, it's take away the white space, is not an empty string, then we'll re-enable that button. Button OK dot enabled equals true. There are lots of ways that you can do this, and this is one that should work for us. Let's save, click Home, Run. Here's the main form. It's still in its default state. We'll click Child Form. You'll notice that that OK button is disabled, and we can type in here, and the OK button is re-enabled. Now let's turn our attention to the main form. I'll click the mainform.psf file. And there's already a Call Child Form button, but it's placed rather awkwardly in the middle of the form. So I'm going to scoot that up. You can see that I'm using those indentation guidelines. I'm going to scoot it up to the top and make that button a bit bigger. And I'm also going to change the text property of the button from Call Child Form to Open Child Form. I think that's a bit more user-friendly. Okay. And now we'll go over here to the toolbox and grab a text box. And this time I'll drag and drop the text box on the toolbox. In order to resize it, I need to change its multi-line property from false to true. I can do that by double-clicking. Now I can resize that text box and make it a little smaller. No anchoring. Let's go over here to the properties of the form and change its form border style from sizable to fixed single like we did with the child form, and save. There we go. And I'll save that. And the other thing I want to do is make this a read-only text box. So I'll click the text box again and change the read-only property from false to true. This time I'll use the little drop-down menu. Okay, and now read-only is true. And save. Okay, and this is also text box 1, so let's rename it. And I'll rename this text box display message. and click OK. We'll get a list of references, and we have none, and we click Apply. And that's just about all we need to do to the appearance of the main form. Now let's click that Script tab and look at the script in main form. I want to draw your attention to this callChildForm.psf function. Whenever you create a form, a .psf file in PowerShell Studio, it automatically encloses all of the code for that form in a function. And the function name is always call dash the name of the file, an underscore, and the file name extension. So if this code weren't already there, I could easily add it. Let me show you. I'm just going to come up here in the load event handler. And if I start typing call and a dash, it lists for me the function that holds the child form.psf code. If I had multiple forms in this project, each one in its own file, I would get a list of multiple functions, one holding the code for each form in my project. And all I need to do to open that form as a modal dialog window is to call the name of that function. Let me show you here. I'm going to go over to the child form, and I'll just type up here, and I'll type call dash, and you can see that it offers me a call to the main form. And again, if there were multiple forms in my project, it would offer me functions for every form. This is a huge time saver, and it makes it very easy not only to open one form from another, but also, and you'll see this in more complicated projects, to pass parameters, because these forms are all enclosed in functions. The last step is to take the text that the user types in the text box on the child form and display it in the text box on the main form. So let's see, text box, display message, and its text property equals, let me show you how, child form text box send message. This is called a return variable. It's a script scoped variable that PowerShell Studio automatically adds to a form when you add the reference function for another form. So when I added call child form underscore PSF, PowerShell Studio automatically added a script scoped variable that contains the text property of this text box send message, in the child form file. PowerShell Studio creates script scoped variables for the most frequently used properties of the most frequently used WinForm controls. You can see the list of those controls and the selected properties in this PowerShell Studio return variables table. Here's the text box, and you see that it saves the text property, which is a string in the variable, and it always names the variable after the file, an underscore, and then the variable that holds the WinForm controls. Now let's try it. Click Run. Open the child form. Say hello. Click OK, and it appears in the main form. And we're done. I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial on building a multi-form GUI app in PowerShell and PowerShell Studio. Here's a list of references to get you going, including the code right on GitHub. Thanks from everyone here at SAPIEN Technologies.